For a moment, everything outside Kensington Palace went silent. Prince William was mid-stride, walking alongside Kate, when he suddenly stopped, frozen, almost as if something in the crowd had pierced straight through the royal routine. No announcements, no warning, just the prince staring at a single heartbreaking sign held by a trembling pair of hands. And within seconds, the crowd's reaction shifted from simple admiration to raw, tearful emotion. What did William see? And why did it change the entire atmosphere outside the palace? If moments like these fascinate you as much as they do us, go ahead and tap that like button. It genuinely helps the channel. And if you enjoy emotional, behind-the-scenes royal stories, consider subscribing. It's free, and it means you won't miss the next episode. And hey, feel free to share this with someone who loves the royal family as much as you do. The late afternoon sunlight draped Kensington Palace in a warm, golden glow, turning its red brick face into something almost cinematic. Families lined the pathway, tourists held their phones high, and royal guards stood in sharp formation, stoic, unmoving, unmistakably regal. It felt like an ordinary public moment, the kind William and Kate had walked through countless times before. Yet, no one knew that today would be different. Today, a single pause would ripple to the crowd, like a whisper turning into a storm. Prince William and Princess Kate stepped out onto the familiar stone walkway, their pace relaxed, their expressions soft and warm. William had that easy half-smile he often wore around people. Kate's stride was graceful, poised, her hand brushing the side of her coat as she waved gently at a child perched on his father's shoulders. It all looked perfectly routine, until it wasn't. Halfway down the path, William's step slowed, just slightly at first, subtle enough that only someone watching closely might have noticed. But then he stopped completely. Not a stumble, not a moment of confusion. He simply froze mid-walk, his boots grounded on the palace stones as though something had reached out and pulled him still. The royal guard shifted by a fraction, almost invisible to most eyes, but enough to show their training had kicked in. Kate took 2 more steps before she realized her husband wasn't beside her anymore. She turned back, brows gently lifting, her expression softening with immediate concern. The crowd murmured. Cameras lowered. A hush fell so fast it felt unnatural, like someone had muted the world. William wasn't looking at the cameras. He wasn't looking at the palace. He wasn't even looking at Kate. His eyes were locked on a small cluster of people pressed against the barriers. Specifically, a handmade sign held between 2 trembling hands. The sign wasn't professionally printed. It wasn't decorative or polished. It didn't have glitter or borders. It was simple whiteboard, corners slightly bent, the black marker strokes uneven. But the words were enough to stop a future king in his tracks. No one around him could read it yet, not from their angle. But the reaction spreading across William's face, soft shock, gentle ache, the slightest tightening in his jaw, was enough to tell everyone that it wasn't just any sign. Something about it struck deep, cutting to the public layer of the moment, and reaching somewhere entirely private. Kate stepped closer to him, her hand brushing his arm, not guiding him but grounding him. She followed his gaze toward the barrier, looking for whatever had captured him so intensely. When she found it, her expression changed too, though she hid it with a discipline she had mastered over years of royal life. Her breath tightened, her eyes softened, the warmth in her face dimmed for a moment, replaced by something heavier. The crowd, sensing the emotional shift but not yet understanding it, leaned forward. Some stood on toes. Others fell completely silent, the air thick with suspense. Even the guard seemed to stand more squarely, sensing the moment's weight. Finally, one woman near the front whispered to her partner, "What's happening?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. He doesn't usually stop." And he didn't. William had always been steady, composed, moving with certainty even in the hardest moments of public life. So when he halted like this, so abruptly, so visibly, it sent a quiet jolt through everyone present. A young guard, barely 20, tightened his grip on his ceremonial rifle. His eyes flicked toward William, then toward the crowd. It wasn't fear. It was instinct. Royal Guard were trained to absorb every detail. And right now, the detail that mattered was the prince's sudden shift from routine to vulnerability. Kate leaned slightly toward William, her voice soft, barely audible. "Are you all right?" William didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step forward toward the crowd. A gasp cut through the air. He wasn't supposed to approach the barrier directly, not without a reason, not without briefing, not without a signal from security. But he did. Kate stayed close behind him, her presence steady, supportive, almost protective in her own way. The guards reacted instantly, adjusting positions with sharp precision. One stepped to William's right, another to Kate's left, forming a quiet but unmistakable shield. Yet even then, William didn't stop moving forward. And the crowd's silence grew heavier, like they were watching a moment unfold that wasn't rehearsed, wasn't planned, wasn't royal protocol, but something human, real, undeniably emotional. When he finally reached the barrier, the people holding the sign suddenly realized he was coming toward them. Their eyes widened. One of them, a middle-aged woman, pressed a hand to her mouth, trembling. The other person, a boy who looked no older than 12, held the sign a little higher, as if hoping the prince could read it more clearly. William exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cool air. The guards tensed slightly but didn't interfere. Kate's hand hovered near him, not stopping him, just ready. Then, the prince finally came close enough for others to see the message. Gasps erupted. Some covered their mouths. Others simply froze, because the words were simple, haunting, and painfully intimate. "Thank you, Prince William. You helped my mum when no one else did." The boy holding the sign had tears in his eyes. The woman standing beside him, likely his grandmother, tried to steady her breathing, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. It didn't take long for people nearby to piece together who the boy was referencing and what memory those words were pulling from William's heart. He swallowed, eyes softening in a way that only grief mixed with gratitude could create. This wasn't about royal duty. This wasn't about public image. This wasn't about cameras. This was about his mother. And suddenly everyone understood. William wasn't Prince William in that moment. He wasn't the future king. He wasn't a public figure under scrutiny. He was just a son, seeing the echo of Princess Diana's compassion reflected in a stranger's message. The emotion hit the crowd instantly. Some people wiped their eyes. Others whispered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Even the guards, trained to remain stone-faced, felt their posture soften for half a heartbeat. Kate stepped beside him, not in front, not behind, beside him, as William leaned down slightly, as she always reading the boy's eyes. "She would have been proud of you," he said in a quiet voice meant only for them. But the crowd felt it, even if it didn't hear the exact words, because the moment spoke louder than the sound ever could. And that was the exact second when everything outside Kensington Palace changed, from a simple walk to a deeply human moment that no one expected and no one would forget. For a few long seconds, everything around the prince seemed to dissolve: the crowd, the guards, the flashing cameras. Only the boy holding the sign remained in William's focus, as if the rest of the world had blurred away like an out-of-focus photograph. It wasn't the boy's tears that struck him first. It wasn't even the words written across the sign. It was the familiarity in the emotion behind those words, the unmistakable sincerity that reminded him of the countless stories his mother once answered with the same open heart. The boy clutched the sign tightly, knuckles pale from the cold, but he stood firm. There was bravery there, not the loud, heroic kind, just quiet courage, the kind Diana used to see in the people who approached her with their own painful stories. William swallowed, the memory of her rising like a tide. He couldn't stop. He'd seen signs referencing her before. Drawings, flowers, messages of sympathy, of remembrance, of love. But this one wasn't about losing her. It wasn't a tribute to the past. It wasn't nostalgia. It was gratitude. "You helped my mum when no one else did." William blinked, and for a moment, he could almost hear her voice beside him. The way she used to speak gently, without titles, without walls, without expectation. She helped people because she couldn't imagine doing anything else. And now, standing here in front of him, was someone who'd been touched by that ripple of kindness years later. Kate noticed a shift in him, not the public version, but the private one only she saw. She stepped a little closer, her presence steady. Her hand didn't reach for him yet, but it was there, ready, Always ready. The woman standing with the boy wiped her eyes. "We didn't come here to cause a fuss," she whispered nervously, her voice trembling. We just wanted to say thank you." William lowered his head slightly, softening the moment. "You're not causing a fuss," he said gently. "I promise." The boy cleared his throat, voice small and tight. "My mom, she told me stories about your mother when I was little. She said Princess Diana helped her once when she was struggling. She never forgot." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I wanted you to know." The sincerity hit William harder than he expected. He had heard thousands of stories about his mother, but each one carried its own weight, its own echo of who she'd been. Someone who saw pain and didn't look away. Someone who understood loneliness, even when surrounded by cameras. Someone who reminded the world that compassion wasn't weakness. The royal guards around him remained alert, but even they sensed the atmosphere shifting from routine to something profoundly intimate. One of the guards, older, more seasoned, subtly signaled to the younger ones to stand easy, not breaking formation, but softening the edges of their tension. Even soldiers could recognize when a moment needed space rather than steel. Kate watched the boy carefully, her eyes softening with warmth. She stepped beside William and crouched slightly so she was closer to the boy's height. "What was your mum's name?" she asked, her voice laced with quiet sincerity. "Emily," he whispered. "She passed away last year." Kate's heart tightened visibly. "I'm so sorry." William closed his eyes briefly. Loss had become a constant companion in his life. But whenever someone spoke about their mother with that mix of pain and pride, it struck a chord he never stopped feeling. The grandmother placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "Emily struggled for years after losing her job," she explained softly. "And when she hit her lowest point, someone from your mother's foundation reached out. A small act, but it changed everything for her. She always said that Princess Diana saved her." William didn't speak right away. He needed a moment, not as a prince, just as a man hearing how his mother's legacy continued living where he least expected. "What did she say about it?" he finally asked, his voice quieter now. The boy smiled sadly. "She said your mom saw her, really saw her, like she was a person, not a problem." That sentence landed with weight, because that was Diana. She didn't just talk about compassion. She lived it. And William had spent much of his adult life trying, in his own ways, to carry those threads forward. Mental health advocacy, homelessness initiatives, early childhood work. But hearing someone directly link Diana's kindness to a life that had blossomed because of it, it was different. It was personal. It was a reminder that legacy wasn't about headlines or ceremonies. It was about the quiet moments no one saw. Kate nudged gently closer, letting her shoulder brush William's. Nothing dramatic, just a small, grounding connection. The crowd watched with a mixture of awe and tenderness. They weren't just seeing royals. They were seeing humans navigating grief and gratitude in real time. One woman near the front whispered, "I've never seen him like this." Another replied softly, "It's his mom. Anyone would feel it." The boy lowered the sign, almost embarrassed. "I'm sorry if I upset you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. William shook his head immediately. "You haven't upset me. You've given me something important." The grandmother frowned gently. "What's that, sir?" "A reminder," William said, stepping closer. "A reminder that she's still helping people. Even now." The crowd felt a collective sting of emotion in their chests. Kate smiled at the boy. "Do you want a moment with William?" she asked quietly. The grandmother blinked. "Is that allowed?" Kate gave a warm laugh. "I think today it is." A ripple of soft laughter moved through the crowd, cutting the tension just enough to let everyone breathe again. William crouched to the boy's level, the guards instinctively shifting to shield but not block. "Tell me about her," he said. "Tell me about Emily." The boy's eyes widened, surprised at the sincerity of the invitation. So he did, in halting words at first, then with growing confidence. He spoke about his mother's kindness, her struggles, her resilience, her dreams of a happier life for him. He spoke about moments that were ordinary but precious. Burnt toast mornings, silly jokes, late-night talks. He spoke like someone who missed her deeply, but wanted the world to know she mattered. As he spoke, Tears streamed down the grandmother's cheeks. Kate reached out gently, placing a supportive hand on her arm. "She sounds like she was an incredible woman," she said softly. The grandmother nodded. She was. William listened closely, absorbing every detail, not out of obligation, not because cameras were watching, but because he genuinely cared. Because in this child's grief and gratitude, he saw reflections of his own journey, echoes of the love he carried and the loss he endured. When the boy finished, William placed a hand over his own heart for a moment, a gesture he rarely used in public. Then he looked at the boy with a steady, warm expression. "Your mom would be proud of you," he said. "More than you know." The boy wiped his eyes. "I hope so." William stood slowly, exhaling as if releasing a weight he'd carried for years. And the moment, quiet, emotional, profoundly human, settled over Kensington Palace like a gentle tide. What no one knew was that this was only the beginning of what the prince was about to do next, and it would leave the entire crowd in tears. The atmosphere outside Kensington Palace shifted in a way that no one could fully explain. After William's intimate conversation with the boy, the crowd expected the moment to gently settle, but instead, something deeper began to unfold. The air felt charged, almost electric, not with excitement, but with emotion so raw it made even the royal guard stiffen with strange awareness. Kate felt it first. While William was still standing close to the boy and his grandmother, Kate's gaze swept quietly across the crowd. She wasn't looking for danger. She wasn't scanning for cameras. She was reading faces, something she had learned to do naturally, instinctively. The line between public duty and private compassion had blurred in moments like this before, but today felt different. Just a few feet away from the boy, Kate noticed a cluster of people whose expressions mirrored the same heavy mixture of sadness and gratitude she had just witnessed. A middle-aged man, eyes rimmed red, held a small framed photograph against his chest. Beside him, a teenage girl gripped his sleeve, biting her lip to hold back tears. Behind them, two older women leaned on each other for support, their gazes locked on William with a kind of aching reverence. Kate's brows softened. Something was happening in the crowd, something William hadn't seen yet. It wasn't just a boy's story. It was something collective, something that had been waiting quietly for the right moment to surface. Slowly, Kate turned her head toward the royal guards. Their stance had changed subtly. They were scanning the crowd not out of suspicion, but out of an urgent need to understand the emotional shift. A few guards exchanged glances, not fear, but confusion tinged with empathy. Even they felt the weight of the moment pressing in from all directions. Kate whispered softly to the guard nearest her, "Do you see them?" The guard followed her line of sight. His jaw tightened slightly, not out of alarm, but surprise. "Yes, ma'am." They looked distressed. Kate shook her head gently. "Not distressed." Moved. Deeply, the guard hesitated, then nodded. Just then, William stepped back from the boy and the grandmother. His expression was still heavy, still caught somewhere between grief and gratitude. The crowd remained silent, almost reverent. It felt as if no one wanted to break the spell that had settled over the palace grounds. But then the teenage girl from the second group took a small step forward. She didn't shout. She didn't call out. She simply held up her own sign, smaller, but trembling in her hands. Kate saw it first. William turned slowly. And then the second wave of emotion hit him. The sign read, "Princess Diana comforted my sister at the hospital. We never forgot." William's lips parted slightly, not in shock, but in recognition of a truth he'd been hearing all his life. His mother didn't just reach people. She stayed with them. Even decades later, her kindness lingered like a warm light in the memories of strangers. But the teenage girl's voice was what broke the moment open. She held her hand, the girl said, her voice cracking. "My sister was 6. She was so scared. Your mom stayed with her until she fell asleep." William's breath caught, and Kate felt it. Something shifted inside him, something that hadn't moved in a long time. A grief that wasn't sharp anymore, but deep. A love that continued to echo across years and generations. The man beside the girl stepped forward, removing his hat out of respect. "We didn't come to burden you, sir. We only want to finally say thank you." Before William could respond, another voice rose from the crowd, then another, and another, soft, trembling, hesitant, each one carrying a story about Diana, a moment she touched, a wound she healed, a stranger she comforted. It spread like a gentle, unstoppable wave, one person breaking the silence, inspiring the next until the entire crowd seemed to share the same breath. The older women stepped forward. One clutched a worn-out newspaper clipping. "She visited our shelter," she said. "No press, no cameras, just her." She pressed the clipping against her heart. "My sister still talks about that night." Another woman held up a small bouquet of flowers, her hands shaking. "She helped my son when he was lost," she whispered. "He would have been the same age as William now." William closed his eyes, trying to steady the swell of emotion building behind his ribs. Kate reached out then, finally placing a gentle hand on his arm, not to pull him away, not to shield him, but to remind him that he wasn't facing this alone. Whatever this moment was becoming, he had her beside him. A hush washed over the crowd again. William looked at each face, one by one, carefully, deliberately. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't distressed. He was present, deeply present. Kate leaned closer and whispered, "They've been holding this for years." William nodded slowly, because they thought no one would listen. He stepped forward, and the guards instinctively shifted, forming a protective arc that didn't disrupt the moment but sheltered it, like an unwritten oath to defend not only their prince, but the humanity unfolding around him. William approached the teenage girl first. "What was your sister's name?" he asked. "Lily," she said softly. "Tell her I remember moments like those," William replied, voice steady. "And I'm glad she wasn't alone." The girl burst into quiet tears, covering her mouth as her father wrapped an arm around her. William touched her shoulder gently before turning to the next group. This time, it was the older woman with the newspaper clipping. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "It means more than you know." Kate watched him with quiet admiration, not because he was a prince handling a public moment well, but because he was a son carrying the weight of a legacy that never stopped unfolding around him. What she noticed next, though, made her heart tighten in a different way. Behind the crowd, near the palace gate, stood a very young royal guard, new, fresh-faced, barely older than a student. He stared at the unfolding scene with a mixture of awe and something else, something like grief. His posture remained disciplined, but his eyes glistened. Kate recognized a silent ache instantly. She took a step toward him when William finally returned to her side. He followed her gaze. The young guard stiffened, trying to compose himself, but the emotion in his eyes was unmistakable. William and Kate exchanged a glance, a silent understanding. This moment wasn't just touching the crowd. It was touching everyone, even the ones trained never to show it. And what William decided to do next would break the last remaining barrier between royal protocol and raw human truth. The young royal guard stood frozen near the palace gate, his posture straight, his chin lifted, his uniform immaculate. Yet nothing could hide the faint tremble in his jaw or the shimmer in his eyes. This was a guard who had probably rehearsed his training 1,000 times, preparing for every possible scenario. But not for this. Not for the sight of a prince openly carrying the weight of his mother's memory. Not for a crowd shedding tears over a legacy of kindness that refused to fade. Not for the moment when duty collided with humanity so completely that even the most disciplined soldier couldn't look away. William and Kate both noticed him, and both instantly understood. The guard was young, barely 20, maybe. Too young to remember Diana when she was alive, yet old enough to have grown up hearing her name spoken with a kind of reverence usually reserved for legends. Perhaps he had a story of his own, or perhaps the stories unfolding around him, the boy, the girl, the families, had touched something raw inside him. William stepped away from the crowd slowly, with Kate beside him, moving toward the young man. The royal guards nearby shifted reflexively, unsure what their prince intended to do. This wasn't protocol, not even close. Guards were trained to stand firm, silent, untouched by the emotional tide around them. But William didn't stop walking. The young guard's eyes widened. He straightened even more, trying desperately to lock back into perfect formation. His hands tightened around the ceremonial rifle. His breathing turned shallow. Kate reached him first. Her voice was soft. "Are you all right?" The guard blinked hard, trying to will the wetness away. "Ma'am, I'm fine." His voice cracked on the last word. William stepped right beside him. "It's all right," he said gently. "You don't have to hide it." A tear escaped, sliding down the guard's cheek despite every effort to stop it. For a split second, he looked terrified, not of William, but of breaking royal discipline in front of the public. I'm sorry, sir," he whispered. "I didn't mean—" "You don't need to apologize," William interrupted, his voice steady, warm. "This moment is affecting all of us." The guard hesitated, then finally exhaled, a quiet, shaky breath. He blinked again, this time letting the emotion come instead of fighting it. The crowd noticed, but no one mocked him. No one laughed. Instead, a hush of respect fell over the palace grounds, as if every person present instinctively felt that something extraordinary was happening. Kate stepped a little closer. "Did you know someone she helped?" she asked gently. The guard swallowed. "My mum, ma'am," he whispered. She talked about Princess Diana every birthday, every Christmas. Said she was the reason she chose to raise us differently. Kinder, stronger." His voice trembled again. "She passed away last year." William felt the words like a blow to the chest. Grief recognized grief. Loss recognized loss. Love recognized love. Without thinking, not as a prince, not as a figure of protocol, William placed a hand on the young guard's shoulder. Gasps rose from the crowd. Guards never broke formation. Princes never touched them during duty. It was the kind of moment no royal commentator could ever predict. But William didn't care about protocol. "Not today. I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "And I'm honored you remember my mother with such love." The guard nodded, eyes falling to the ground. He tried one last time to wipe a tear discreetly. But it didn't matter anymore. The prince had already seen him. The crowd had seen him. And no one looked at him with judgment. Kate's voice was soft again. "What's your mother's name?" The guard took a shaky breath. "Clara." Kate smiled, gently, warmly. "Clara raised a good son." More tears fell. This time, the guard didn't try to stop them. And then William said something that would later echo across social media, news clips, and thousands of hearts. "We were all raised by someone strong," he said. "Even when they're gone, they're still shaping us." The crowd felt it like a pulse. Someone near the front whispered, "He's talking about Diana." Another murmured, "He's talking about all of them." Then something unexpected happened. An older man in the crowd, who had been silent the entire time, stepped forward and raised his voice, not loud, but steady. "Your mother changed more lives than she ever knew." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't poetic. But they hit the air with a truth so powerful that even the guards inhaled sharply. Another person added, "And so are you, sir." Then another. Then another. Voices rising, overlapping, not in chaos but in unity. "She lives on in you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering her. She'd be proud of you both." It wasn't applause. It wasn't cheering. It was raw gratitude, spoken with trembling voices. William felt his throat tighten. Kate slipped her hand into his, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but simply because she knew he needed it. The young guard took a steadying breath and, with William's hand still on his shoulder, whispered, "Thank you, sir." William finally stepped back, letting the guard return to formation, but not before giving him a small, understanding nod. A nod that said, "You're human, and that's okay." As William and Kate walked back toward the palace, the crowd didn't erupt into noise. They didn't stampede forward for photos. They simply watched, quiet, emotional, reverent, as the couple made their way up the steps. Kate glanced at her husband. "Are you all right?" William exhaled, slow and deep. "Yes," he whispered. I think I needed that." Kate smiled softly. "I think they needed you." He looked back once more at the crowd, still holding their signs, their memories, their tears. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the weight of expectation pressing on him. He felt connection. He felt legacy. He felt human. And as the palace doors opened behind him, William realized something quietly profound. His mother wasn't just a memory. She was a living thread, woven into strangers, into stories, into moments like this one. A legacy that refused to fade. A kindness that kept finding its way back to him. Even outside Kensington Palace, on an ordinary afternoon that had become extraordinary. And when the doors closed behind him, the crowd outside felt the same thing. They had just witnessed the prince, become a son again,